In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, may the peace and blessings of Allah, the Exalted, be upon the Prophet Muhammad and his purified progeny, and may the damnation of Allah be upon their enemies. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our 10th episode, where we will be continuing to discuss the hadith which relates to speaking about the merits of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Now, in the last episode, we spoke about a dua of Imam Rida alayhi salam, the 8th Imam, and this particular supplication is found in Sheikh Saduq's Shiite Creed, a Shiite Creed, or Al-I'tiqadat Al-Imamiyya. And within this dua, Imam Rida alayhi salam disassociated from those and indicated that he is free of those who claim things about him and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam which they haven't said themselves. We then went on to the narration from Al-Kafi, in which Imam Baqir alayhi salam defines what a Ghali is. So we said obviously they are those who are the ghulat which directly say that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam are gods. And then we have those who would be considered a type of ghulat, which say things about Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam which they have not said about themselves. So they don't necessarily say that they are gods, but they make up things which have no basis within the ahadith or history. So someone asked again in the hadith to Imam Baqir alayhi salam that what is a Ghali, and he said they are people who say about us which we do not say about ourselves. And we said that when we read this with the hadith of say anything about our merits, Ghulu fi fadlina ma shi'tum, which is narrated in many different books. When we read this narration with the other narration, we find that one, yes, can say about the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam their merits as they like, but these should be established merits. And then if the person wants to praise these merits or speak about them in a way which is, let's say, relating to their culture or language, which didn't necessarily exist at that time, that is fine, as long as they wouldn't be in the category of those people which say things about the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam which they didn't say about themselves. So both of these narrations need to be read together in order to understand the ones about say anything about our merits, because of course this narration is twisted by the mukhalifin and the nawasib, and of course the ghulat also use this narration to say things which would be ghulu about Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, and they may not necessarily call them God or raise them or say that they are raising them to Lordship, but then they do say other things which would indicate that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam are partners with Allah Azza wa Jal. So in this episode we want to continue speaking about the argument which is put forth by some of the nawasib in the way they interpret this narration, and of course the ghulat as well. Now, as we know, some of the ahadith or the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam are just like the Quran. We have muhkam and mutashabihat. We have those which are very direct and clear in their meaning, and other narrations which have a more ambiguous type of meaning, or which need interpretation, a type of ta'wil to them. So this narration about say anything of our merits, or say anything you like about our merits, but do not raise us to Lordship, this would fall into that category of narrations which needs to be read in line with other narrations and compared with the overall aqidah of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam to understand them. So if we would take the argument of those mukhalifin who say that what is your problem with the previous clips that you've seen in your series? You're allowed to say anything that you like about Ahlul Bayt, just that they are not gods. If we would take this type of understanding for this narration, then would it then mean we can call the imams alayhim as-salam prophets? That I say Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, the 6th Imam, is a prophet, or I say that they are messengers? Because according to this literal type of understanding, or wrong type of understanding that is being put forth by some, it would be allowed, because I am not raising the imams alayhim as-salam to lordship, divine lordship. If I was to call Imam Ali alayhi salam a prophet or messenger, that would not be putting him up to the status of lordship. So according to those who misunderstand this hadith, it should be something fine to do. But again, no one would agree with such a meaning. So let us see in the narrations what the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam said about those who would call them prophets. And let's compare this hadith with the hadith of say anything about our merits or our virtues. We find in a hadith of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam that he says the following: من قال بأننا أنبياء فعليه لعنة الله ومن شك في ذلك فعليه لعنة الله. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, the sixth Imam, says that one who says we are prophets, so they claim that we are anbiya, upon him is the curse, the la'na of Allah. So anyone who would claim such a thing, he would have the curse of Allah the Exalted upon him. And as we know, some sects, such as the Qadianis, or they call themselves Ahmadis, the Ahmadiyya, some of these sects, they speak about the continuation of prophethood. And they do not say that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the final of all prophets. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says that such a belief, of course, is one that goes against Islam. And they have strong condemnation, the Imams alayhi salam, against such a belief. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said, one who says that we are prophets, so upon him is the curse of Allah. And one who doubts regarding that, so upon him is the curse of Allah. So you cannot doubt that someone who would attribute prophethood to any of the Imams or anyone after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is the seal of the prophets and the messengers, you cannot doubt that such a person would be cursed according to the hadith of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Otherwise you yourself would be cursed. So when we go to the narration, say anything about our virtues as you like, say anything about our merits, but do not raise us to the status of lordship. Someone might come and say, okay, I can call them prophets, I can call them messengers, which is also condemned in previous narration in the other episodes, where some people claim that they are also messengers. They condemn this. But one could say that according to the distorted interpretation that the mukhalifin like to push on this, or that the deviant ghulat like to push on the narration, where you can say anything except putting them up to lordship. We see here, when we join this hadith, one couldn't come along and say any of the imams are prophets. And even the hadith about the merits also has a variation that say anything about us except nabuwah. But most of them do not mention this exception here. So if we would read this following narration, it would show that one cannot do that. One could not claim that they are prophets, although this would not be putting them up to the status of rububiyyah, of divine lordship. So such a saying would be, of course, a false and incorrect saying. And we also find on the same page in the next narration, this is just a side note for the viewers, that Bayan bin Sam'an was referred to as Bunan bin Tabban. This was another variation of his name. These are the two names for the same individual as according to some of the narrations. So if anyone would come and say the Imams are prophets, this would be a lie. This would be saying things about them which they did not say about themselves, and such the person would have the la'na of Allah. But of course, if one interprets the hadith about speaking of their merits in the incorrect sense, they would say, yeah, I can call them prophets. Again, if we took such an interpretation, then one would also be able to say that the Imams are even higher than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of the ghulat, they come out with such a belief where they say that, for example, a'udhu billah, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is just a postman for Imam Ali alayhi salam, and that Imam Ali alayhi salam, he is higher in status. Or some people, due to their ignorance, say that we can't differentiate between the ma'sumin, between the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Imams. All of them are from the nur of Allah. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha, and the Imma alayhim salam, they are all one and equal. Such a belief, of course, is incorrect. And if one would misunderstand the narration when we speak about the virtues of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and we are permitted to say what we like about their virtues, of course with conditions, then one could also say that one of the imams, Imam Ali alayhi salam, is higher than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And if someone would believe and say such a statement, they would be out of Shi'ism. But again, just to demonstrate how the distorted interpretation is wrong from the mukhalifin and the ghulat when it comes to this narration, we read the following. So again, we are showing this second narration to demonstrate how one, if they take the distorted interpretation of saying anything about the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam's merits, about this hadith, then again it would also contradict the other hadith, because one could come along, as I mentioned, and say Imam Ali alayhi salam is higher than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam according to that distorted interpretation. So we read the following narration from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, the 6th Shia Imam, and such a belief which he is going to state in this following hadith is agreed on by all Muslims, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the highest of all creation, he is the last prophet and the last messenger, and that there is no one superior to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All Muslims agree on this. Although we find the mukhalifin, despite saying this and saying that they believe in this, will put some of their sahaba, their companions that they respect, higher than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For example, their second caliph, Umar, they will say that he knew better than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or they will imply that he knew better in some matters, and that Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah agreed with Umar in the wahi, in giving revelation, and not with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So according to their belief, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had this type of jahl, and other companions, of course, would correct him.
ينزل القرآن يأيد رأي مين؟ يأيد رأي سيدنا عمر ابن الخطاب ويعيب على النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام.
أقبل صلى الله عليه وسلم ليصلي عليه، فإذا الصحابة ينظرون فإذا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم سيصلي على رجل رأس من رؤوس الأعداء للمسلمين في المدينة. هذا يعني لو صلى على غيره ممكن، لكن هذا رأس من رؤوس المنافقين وتصلي عليه. أقبل عمر قال يا رسول الله كيف تصلي على هذا يعني أحقر من أنك تصلي عليه. صلى عليه. نزل بعد ذلك القرآن على نبينا صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول فيه الله سبحانه وتعالى ولا تصلي على أحد منهم مات أبدا ولا تقم على قبره إنهم كفروا بالله ورسوله. فهذا من موافقة القرآن لرأي عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه الذي رأى.
But obviously within the Shia belief, we believe that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the highest of all creation, and he is the most knowledgeable, as the imams alayhim salam learned from him. So yes, it is claimed by all Muslims, and all Muslims have a consensus that no one is above the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says in the following narration, Ittaqullah وعظموا الله وعظموا رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله ولا تفضلوا على رسول الله أحدا. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says in the following narration, fear Allah, ittaqullah, and magnify Allah and magnify His Rasul, His Messenger, and do not give superiority to anyone over RasulAllah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam clearly says here that do not give superiority to anyone over Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. He is the highest of all creation and all human beings. For Allah blessed and exalted has merited him and loves people of the household of your Prophet with intense love. And neither exaggerate nor be saying what we are not saying. If you say what we say, you will die and we will pass away. Then Allah will resurrect you and resurrect us. So we would be where Allah so desires and you with us. So very clear in the narration that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is highest in merit and superiority. And this type of narration is also mentioned in other places of our books, maybe with variances in the wording, but it is clearly mentioned that no one can put any of the imams alayhim salam or any other person or human being or creation above the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, if we take this distorted understanding of say anything about our merits but do not put us up to divine lordship, then one could say that Imam Ali alayhi salam is higher than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. But this is not how we read narrations. One must gather the narrations and compare these narrations with the narration of the merits, where you cannot say things about Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam which they haven't said about themselves, where you cannot put anyone above the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, and then you would come to a consistent understanding where you can say anything regarding the established merits of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and not make up those things which have no basis in the ahadith. Because firstly, we showed the narration where you cannot call them prophets and put them to prophethood, like some sects like to do with some of the other individuals. And you cannot put anyone over RasulAllah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, where some will come and say, oh, the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, they are all created from Allah's nur, so we cannot say who's higher. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam are like of the same status, or it's not beneficial for us to say who is higher. No, this contradicts the clear words which are reported and attributed to the imams alayhim salam, where they say that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa tufaddilu ala RasulAllah ahada, that do not put anyone above Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And unfortunately, I've heard some people, due to their ignorance before, where we say that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi is higher than all of the imams, they will say that no, but they are all from the nur of Allah and we shouldn't differentiate. This is jahl, ignorance, and this is contradicting the narrations. So join us in the next episode where we will look into further narrations which show the great status of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi and how the imams alayhim salam emphasized on such a status. And we will also look into the word abd, where some say it is ghulu for someone to say they are abd of anyone other than Allah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil farajahum wa la'na a'da'ahum.